This happened in the summer before my last year of high school, which was in the year 2006. My parents were off visiting family for the weekend, and being an only child, that meant that I was home alone, which I was perfectly fine with. We lived in a safe suburb of Boston, and I won't give any more detail than that. The houses on my street were nice, and most were quite big. Ours was one of the rare exceptions. It was smaller, with a single-car garage. Since it was just me and my parents there, a larger place would just mean more cleaning. That weekend began normally. I spent the evening out with some of my friends, just wasting time and hanging out. We were over at my friend Jake's house for the most part in his basement. He had a big screen TV down there, as well as a pool table. There were 5 of us in total, and as the night went on, we decided to walk around the neighborhood. It was a quiet night, but we stopped off at another friend's house who was having a small get-together. We only stayed for a bit, and then headed back. It was a little past midnight when I decided to head home. My friends offered to walk me home, but I declined, assuring them I'd be fine. It was a short walk, maybe 15 minutes at the most. The rest of them were going to crash at Jake's place, since they all lived far. Jake's parents were away too, and they were a little more lenient about having guests over. That's why everyone stayed there. As I approached my house from the street, I noticed a black car parked on the road a few houses down. It was a weird sight, because our neighborhood was tight-knit, and I was familiar with all my neighbors and their vehicles. This car was unfamiliar, and it stuck out. It would not be unheard of for someone to have a guest over, so I wasn't scared, but I did notice it. The car was a newer-looking black Ford with tinted windows, at least on the back. I walked past it and up to the house. I went to the side door as I always did, and once I was inside, I locked the door behind me. The house was silent as it should be, but for some reason, it felt strange. Maybe I was just uncomfortable being alone, but for some reason, I was feeling paranoid. Felt like somebody was there. I began walking around the house, turning on all the lights to make sure I was actually alone. I checked the living room, the kitchen, and even the small bathroom, anywhere that somebody could potentially hide. Finding nothing, I tried to laugh off my nerves. With a deep breath, I headed upstairs, telling myself that once I checked the bedrooms, I could relax, maybe even feel silly for the whole thing. But then, as I reached the top of the stairs, I heard it, a sound that froze me in my tracks. It was the distinct sound of somebody running on the main floor of the house. I reached the master bedroom just in time to hear the front door open. Right then, I wasn't sure if it was somebody leaving or if they were still there, but I couldn't risk it. I locked myself in the bathroom and called the police. After a couple minutes, I was pretty sure that there was nobody else there, so I poked my head out the bathroom and looked down the stairs. The front door stood wide open. Not wanting to risk it, I waited a couple more minutes for the police to arrive. When they got there, they checked the house to make sure nobody was there, and they found nobody. Then they asked me if anything was taken. I told them I didn't know. There was nothing obvious that was missing. The TV was still there, and I couldn't tell if we were actually robbed. I would later find out from my mom and dad that some money was missing, and one of my dad's watches was gone. I didn't know at the time, though. Before the police left, I told them about the strange car that I had seen on the street. We went out together to check it out, but the car was gone. That seemed to confirm it to me that the car was involved. I've had some time to think about what happened when I entered the house. It seems that when I got home, the guy was in there already, and when he heard me come in, he must have gone down to the basement to hide. That's why I never found him on the main floor. Then when I went upstairs, he used that opportunity to get out. We still don't know how he got in, because there was no damage to the locks or the windows. It's possible that I was dumb enough to leave a door unlocked, but that would be unusual for me. Maybe the guy was an expert lockpicker. I really don't know. Even with my description of the car, the cops were never able to make an arrest. Our neighborhood was on edge for a while after this, because it was a really unusual thing for us. Break-ins simply don't happen around there. This was the first and last, as far as I'm aware. It was a Thursday night about a year and a half ago, and I was all alone in my house. I was married with a 10-year-old son, but they were away on a trip. Unfortunately for me, I couldn't attend due to work commitments. When I was done at work, I ordered some takeout and watched a bit of TV. We live in a 3-bedroom house on a busy street in the suburbs. It's kind of a rough neighborhood though. You see some sketchy people at times. You'll run into people that look like they might be on something, and some break-ins had happened not long before this story took place. I want to move, but it's close to my work, and my son doesn't want to leave because his friends are all close by as well. We'd only been living there for a year at the time anyway, so another move so soon would have been a hassle. It was a big step up for us anyway, since we lived in an apartment before. At around 9 p.m., after finishing off the last of my pizza, I went upstairs to brush my teeth. As I did, I was walking around the empty house. When I was in our guest room at the side of the house, I looked out the window. That's when I saw a strange man walking by towards my backyard. He wasn't running or looking around suspiciously, just strolled in casually. We didn't have a lock and gate or anything like that, so anybody could walk right in, but it was trespassing, and it was not normal. However, we knew better than to leave anything valuable out there. I wanted to call the cops, but I knew they wouldn't do anything. I had called them for simple things like that before. They would always tell me to call back if things escalated. Simple trespassing is not considered very serious. Not knowing what else to do, I decided to keep an eye on things, moving to a window that offered a better view of the backyard. I couldn't see the man anymore, so I thought he might have moved on. That's when the doorbell rang. The timing couldn't have been more suspect, so I was feeling weary. I approached the front door hesitantly, not planning to open it. Peering through the window, I saw another man, this one dressed in what looked like some kind of uniform, with an orange high-vis vest. It was definitely not the man I had seen in the backyard, or if it was, then he changed his clothes. He had a hat on, slightly obscuring his face, and something that looked like an ID badge hanging around his neck. Definitely looked like he was some kind of official, but I was beyond skeptical. I cautiously opened the door a crack, the chain lock still firmly in place. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Evening," he said, with a smile that seemed practiced. "We've had some reports of water pressure issues in the area, and I'm here to check your home, make sure everything's running smoothly." His explanation sounded strange, and my gut screamed that something wasn't right. "It's pretty late for that, isn't it?" I countered. He chuckled. "Yeah, I know, but we're trying to get it sorted out quickly. Could you come out here for a sec? I'll show you what I mean." Everything in me said no, and I outright refused to come out. He persisted, though. "It'll only take a minute. Really, it's better if I show you," he said. I was about to refuse again when a thought struck me. I asked him, "Are you with the other man in the backyard?" I watched his face closely, trying to see his reaction. For a split second I saw it, the briefest flicker of something in his eyes, before he regained his composure. "Another man?" He feigned surprise. "No, I'm here alone. Maybe you should call the police if there's someone out there." "I think I'll do that," I said, pretending to reach for my phone, which was actually upstairs. He hesitated, then offered a nod. "Of course, just doing my job. Let us know if you have any issues with your water." I nodded, not intending to open the door any further or step outside. "Will do. Good night," I said, then closed the door, making sure to lock it behind me. Once he was gone, I moved quickly around the main floor, double-checking all the locks on the doors and windows. I then went upstairs to get my phone and dialed the non-emergency police number as I moved to a window that gave me a better view of the street. I watched as the man in the uniform met up with the other man who I had seen in my backyard. They spoke briefly, then the man in the vest looked back to my house one more time. Then they headed off down the street together. When I reported the incident to the police, I tried to give as much detail as possible about the two men and their behavior. The operator told me that they sent a patrol to check the area and advised me to stay indoors and keep the doors locked. The rest of the night passed without further incident, but I stayed up really late, not wanting to sleep. I kept replaying the events, thinking of how differently things might have gone if I'd let my guard down. The next day, I told my neighbors about what happened, and one of them had a similar experience. I think those guys were trying different houses in my area, hoping somebody would trust them. I don't think I ever saw those guys again, but plenty of sketchy people come out at night where I live. I think we should move, or at the very least, get a security system, and probably a gun. Two years ago, my parents asked me to come over and watch their house while they were away on vacation. At 23, I had my own place, which was just a basement apartment in an older building downtown. I could barely afford it with my entry-level job. My twin brother Ken, however, was still living with our parents. Ken's life had been a bit of a roller coaster. He had gotten involved with a questionable crowd in high school, but thankfully he was getting on a better path, working hard to put his life back together. He was visiting his girlfriend at the time in another city, which is why my parents asked me to come over and watch the house. Maybe they also thought I would want a break from my dungeon of an apartment. The evening started off fine. It was around 7 p.m., and I was sitting in the living room with my laptop, planning to catch up on some work. I was mostly scrolling through Facebook with a podcast on in the background, though. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I didn't know who it could be. I walked over to the door and looked through the window next to it. There were 3 guys around my age standing there. I looked out for only a split second, but in that time, one of them looked over to me. I recognized one of them immediately. It was Darren, a guy from my high school, and he was always in trouble back then. He was known for coming to school drunk and high. He was that kind of guy. Darren wasn't someone who I'd ever interacted with very much, but I knew of him, and I knew he used to hang out with my brother a bit. Because I knew he was friends with Ken, I thought he was there for him. That's why I decided to open the door and let them know that he wasn't there. After opening the door, I could tell that Darren and the other 2 were not expecting me to be the one answering. They looked confused and then stood there for a good 10 seconds. Then I took the initiative and said, "Ken's not here. He's out of town visiting Sasha." Then they left, but not without giving me a look that made me uneasy. I locked the door and then went back to trying to relax. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. The rest of the night was quiet, but I was creeped out by the visit earlier. I didn't trust those guys, and even though they had left, I couldn't help but worry that they might come back. I spent the night with my phone close by, ready to call for help if I needed to. It was past midnight by the time I had gone to my bedroom. I was just laying in bed watching a movie when I heard the sound of knocking on one of the windows. It sounded like it was coming from the back side of the house. Being as late as it was, I was creeped out for sure, and I thought it was probably Darren and those other sketchy guys from before. Who else could it be? I paused the movie and put my laptop down. Then I put on some sweatpants and a t-shirt. I wasn't going to go down right away. I hoped they'd leave, but then it came again and again. These guys weren't leaving. I crept downstairs, moving towards the side door where the knocking was coming from. The door had a window built in that was the top third or so, and there was a curtain covering it. You could partially see through the curtain, and I could see the silhouettes of a few people since the outdoor light was on. I didn't dare to open it, but I spoke to them through the door. "It's late, what do you want?" I said. "We know Ken's here. He owes us money, and we're not leaving until we get it," one of them grumbled. We went back and forth for a few minutes. I kept saying that he was not there, but they didn't seem to believe me. I should mention that even though Ken and I are twins, we're not identical, so there's no chance that they thought I was him. We look different, and our voices don't even sound that similar. Eventually, I had enough of those guys. I wasn't opening the door, and you can only argue for so long. I said, "Ken's not here, and you need to leave, or I'm calling the police." There was silence after that, and then they finally turned away. I watched them go, and then went to the front window and watched them walk down the street. I had to make sure they were truly gone. After that, I stayed up for most of the night. I think I finally went to sleep at around 4 in the morning. The risk that they would come back and break in was too scary for me. If that happened, then at least I wanted to be awake so I could fight back or call the cops. They never came back though, so in the morning I was relieved. The next day, I called Ken. I needed answers, and honestly, I wanted to vent my frustration about what happened. But Ken denied everything. He claimed he had no idea why those guys would come looking for him. He insisted that he was not involved with them in any way. I told him that they think he owes them money. Even if that's not true, then having some thugs after you is pretty serious, even if they're wrong. I tended to believe my brother, but that didn't change much. I was still worried for him and my parents. I stayed at that house for another night, and then Ken came back home, and I went back to my home. It's been a couple of years now, and Ken has a good job and a place with his girlfriend, so I guess it turned out alright. Maybe those guys were full of it and trying to scare a few bucks out of my brother. Either way, I never heard from them again, and I hope I never do. I was living with my buddy Jonah when this happened. It was the year 2012, and I was renting the top floor of his house. We had gone to college together, and after we graduated, he bought a house with the help of his parents. I moved into the upstairs apartment, while he took the main floor and the basement. Jonah and I had lived together for our last 2 years of college, with another friend of ours. It would have been fun to keep the 3 of us together, but our other buddy got a job in a different city. He would come visit occasionally, but usually it was just me and Jonah. It was a pretty sweet setup. We both had our own space, including a separate kitchen and washroom, but we still got to hang out like we were roommates. We would do dinner together often, and we both had keys to each other's places. There were separate entrances. My door was at the side of the house, and it led straight up a staircase to my apartment. Jonah's entrance was at the front. He would stay at his girlfriend's place a few times each week, so on those nights I would usually be alone, unless I went out too. This one particular night, Jonah was over at his girlfriend's, and I was staying in. It was one of those nights where you're glad to be indoors. The weather was crappy, with rain pelting against the windows, creating the perfect backdrop for watching scary movies. A little after midnight, I noticed a set of headlights pulling into our driveway. My first thought was that it was Jonah coming home for some reason. I got up and looked out the window, but couldn't see much in the rain. It looked like Jonah's car, though. Jonah and his girlfriend had a rough relationship at the time, and it wouldn't have been strange for him to come home late. One time he came back in the middle of the night after they had an argument. I didn't want to go down and barge in if he was upset, so I gave him some space and went back to the movie. I kept my eyes on the screen, then I heard footsteps from downstairs. It had to be Jonah, I thought. It struck me as odd that he didn't shout a hello or anything, but if he was upset, then maybe he wasn't feeling friendly. I grabbed my phone and shot him a quick text. I said something like, "Hey, you back? Let me know if you need to talk," but there was no reply. I stared at my phone waiting, but there was nothing. Figuring he didn't want to talk, I turned off the TV and went to bed. Once the movie was off, I could tell that Jonah was still up moving around downstairs. I didn't know what he was doing, but he was loud. Eventually I did fall asleep, and in the morning, I grabbed my phone and checked the time. It was 9:30. There was a text from Jonah that had come in at 9 a.m. It said, "Nope, still at Jen's. What's up?" A chill ran down my spine. If Jonah wasn't home, then who was in the house last night? I bolted downstairs and out the side entrance, which is the one I used. I walked around the house, and the first thing I noticed was that his car was not in the driveway. Next, I walked up to the front porch where Jonah's entrance was. There was a broken window right next to the front door. It was a small window, just enough for an arm to reach through and unlock the door. As soon as I saw that, I took out my phone and called my friend. He picked up, and I told him everything. He raced home, and I waited for him out front. When he got there, we called the cops, and then we went in to check the damage. Jonah's part of the house was a mess. Drawers were yanked open, stuff thrown around everywhere. It was a clear case of a break-in. The realization hit me hard. The footsteps I heard, the car in the driveway, it was the intruder. I was up there the whole time while some criminals were robbing my friend. The cops came and asked us some questions, and then they walked around for a bit. There were some pretty obvious footprints on the floor, so I thought they might be able to catch them. That was probably wishful thinking, though, because they were never caught. Jonah lost some pretty important stuff that night, like his computer and several pieces of ID, including his passport and his old school ID. That was particularly scary, because he could be the victim of identity theft. They were reported stolen, though, and I don't think he had any problems. I felt pretty guilty for letting that happen, but my friend was understanding. I explained that I heard the break-in, but thought it was him coming in late. Jonah asked how I was able to miss the sound of the window break. I told him that with the heavy rain and the sound of the movie that I had playing, it must have been drowned out. Or maybe I thought it was part of the movie. I felt really stupid about the whole thing. I lived with Jonah for another 2 years after this happened. Then we had a falling out for unrelated reasons, and I moved out. I haven't talked to him in many years now, but as far as I know, he never had any other break-ins. After this incident, he got a security system for the house, including some cameras, so maybe that scared them off.